Hello and welcome to this, our 49th live stream, Counting the Omer. Oops. I just need to take this off. Okay. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Jewish culture, the counting of the Omer begins after the day of Passover. So what happens is the priests go out into the field, they collect a sheaf, which is basically a bundled stalks of grain. They present it to the people, and they say, hey, it's now time and it's now permissible for you to eat of the new grain. So the counting of the Omer is a set of 49 days, ending in the day of Pentecost. And this was usually done after, and it was done on a weekly basis. So you'd have, after the first week after Passover, you'd have the first 7 days of the counting of the Omer, and then the 14th, 21st, then the 28th, and so on until you get to the 49th, and then the day after is Pentecost, or the Feast of the Harvest. So there you have it, the counting of the Omer, something that we look forward to as we get closer to Pentecost. Of course, for Christians, the Pentecost has a completely different meaning, which is basically when the Holy Spirit descends upon the first believers in Jerusalem. So, anyway, that's why we named today's episode live stream after the counting of the Omer. And because it was the 49th. And there's 49 days to counting the Omer. So, cool. So, a little bit of housekeeping. I just want to remind everyone that this Monday, we are doing another popcorn review. And of course, you can guess all you want about who it is going to be about, or what the subject of the popcorn review is going to be about. But the popcorn keeps his secrets. You know, it's very, very popcorn is very private. You know. So anyway, I want to encourage everyone to join us on Monday, May 2nd. It will be at 8 p.m. So this is not going to be a Monday morning release like we normally do. It'll be a Monday evening, and it'll be a premiere. So there'll be a live chat going on, and I'll be interacting with all of you. And we're going to sit back and have some popcorn and enjoy the show. So again, Monday, May 2nd, 8 p.m. Pacific time. It's going to be our popcorn review. So anyway, that's the housekeeping. Let's get into the Q&A section. Again, the rules are, as always, super chats have priority. If you're not going to give a super chat, which is fine, we do take non-super chat questions. But we ask that you make sure that you begin the question with a Q and a colon, so I know it's directed to me. I ask that you only ask the question once, because I am scanning through the live chat to see what I've answered and what I haven't. And I also ask that if it's a question regarding a Bible verse or a foreign word, that you give the chapter and verse, book, chapter, and verse, and or what you think the word means or what language it's from. You know, just to give me a little context here. So, with that said, let's get into we're just going to start off the night with 3 non-super chats, and then we're going to get into the super chats because we've already got like over a dozen super chats already, which is fantastic. Okay, so our first non-super chat is from Cam Britt, and he asks, is it safe to say that Isaiah 9, 6-7 is talking about the future Messiah, or is there merit to the Hezekiah interpretation? Do verbs imply a prophecy for the present or for the future? Yes. What we have to understand here is when we talk about something written in prophetic poetics. Poetry, especially prophetic poetry, has a literary feature that's called amphibole. Okay, an amphibole is when you refer to two or more things at the same time. We see this feature all throughout, say, Egyptian wisdom literature. It's a very common feature of Egyptian wisdom literature. It's found in Jewish wisdom literature. It's found particularly in prophetic literature. We find it a lot in prophecy. And as I say, not just Israelite prophecy. We also find this in Egyptian prophecy too. Like, for example, the prophecy of Nefertiti has this feature as well. So, in the case of Isaiah 9, 6 through 7, and we'll pop this up because it's always a good idea to pop it up. And it says, and I'm just going to go, Isaiah, I'm just going to do that a little higher so we all see. There we go. So you can see the version, the chapter, and the verse. Okay, and we will go to Isaiah 9. 9, 6 through 7. Which says, For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace, and on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord will accomplish this. Okay. Now, when we talk about chapters like Isaiah 7 through 9, the immediate context of this is the Syria-Ephraimite war, where you have Rezin and Pekah going up against Hezekiah, and he's basically told don't sue for peace. Don't sue for peace. Don't send a gift to Tiglath-Pileser III, the Neo-Assyrian emperor, because it's just going to make matters worse. And he says, if you are faithful to the end, you will, Emmanuel, a child will be born, and his name will be Emmanuel. And if not, you'll get the other sign, which is another name. I think it's Shabab. I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's a longer name. But anyway, Al-Hashbaz or something like that. Anyway, Hezekiah is not all that faithful here. He actually does send a gift to... He hedges his bets. He sends a gift to Tiglath-Pileser III, and he gets the second sign, not the Emmanuel sign. But the promise of Emmanuel is still in here. Okay, the promise of Emmanuel is still in here. So, it's one of those passages that's talking about both. It's talking about a future Messiah. It's also talking about a sign for Hezekiah and the outcome of his kingdom as a result of the Syria-Ephraimite war. Okay, so there's going to be, it's both. And what's going to end up happening in the Syria-Ephraimite war is that Tiglath-Pileser III is going to put pressure on Rezin and Pekah to basically, that basically calls a sort of a sudden end to that war. And Rezin and Pekah are now having to face the Assyrians. So it's at that point that things are taking a downturn for the northern kingdom of Israel and for the kingdom of Aram, both of which have joined forces against the kingdom of Judah. So It is definitely here applying to both. It's both. It's not a future Messiah or a Hezekiah interpretation. It's both. And I said that's because this has the literary feature of amphiboly, and many prophetic texts are like this. So, anyway, hope that answers your question. It's an interesting question. Great passage too. Love this passage. All right, our next non-super chat is from Cambrit, and he says, "Is the thing about drilling holes in the head to release evil spirits true?" Okay. The process of drilling holes in the head is called trepanation. Okay. And it is one of those medical processes that was practiced by ancient peoples. And interestingly enough, we do have evidence in Egypt of trepanation. So, it was practiced in ancient Egypt. And interestingly enough, it used to be thought, one of the interesting things that was used to be thought was that when people did this in ancient times, yeah, it provided temporary relief for the person, but it usually ended up being fatal. Well, we now know that that is actually not true. We actually have evidence of trepanation in ancient Egyptian mummies, where the bone actually started growing back. So the wound cover over, it's growing back. Obviously, the person lived long enough to start healing from this. So, it's very interesting that Egyptian medicine was actually sophisticated enough to do this procedure and have the patient live. So, very fascinating. It's very fascinating to see this. But there is evidence for it. There's actually a lot more evidence for this in South America. They did this a lot more in South America than they did in Egypt. In Egypt, they did. It seems that they didn't do it until unless something was so severe that there really was no other choice to do it. But because I think one of the things is I think the Egyptians had more of a understanding of say the severity of the procedure. And Egyptian medicine was well known all across the ancient world. Egypt had the finest doctors medical doctors, if you can use that term, in the whole sort of ancient Near East. There's even one stela. It's a bit of a political propaganda stela called the Bentresh stela. But that stela actually talks about sending a doctor to the Hittites to take care of the queen mother. So, very interesting. It's a very, very interesting stela. But they sent a sacred bark with their god and a physician, to actually work on, say, the royal family. So, absolutely, we do find this happening all over, as far as trepanation is a procedure that we find worldwide. We do find it practiced in Egypt, and we also find it that seems to have been somewhat successful. So, beyond that though, who can say? So, anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. We don't know exactly what it was for. We do know from, say, the Edwin Smith, I think, papyrus, that it was used often for seizures. But whether they connected seizures to evil spirits is another question. We're not always sure that the Egyptians did connect things in that way. So, it wouldn't surprise me if they did, but we just can't assume that they did either. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Interesting question. And our third non-super chat is actually from Kurt F., who asked the very interesting question. Is there any evidence for any of the so-called Dynasty Zero pharaohs, such as Elephant, Crocodile, Scorpion 1 and 2, besides the Turin Papyrus and potsherds? Thank you, Dr. Falk. Yes, there is. We do have evidence for Scorpion 2, the Scorpion mace head. It was produced by during the reign of Scorpion 2. A lot of people now consider Narmer actually part of Dynasty Zero. I consider him part of Dynasty Zero. I know there's still Egyptologists out there that consider him part of Dynasty 1, but I still think I think he's more a fit with Dynasty Zero. We find also several tombs of Dynasty Zero kings at Abydos. We find Eri Hor there. We find Ka there. And of course, Narmer has his tomb there as well. So we also find remains of, say, potsherds of Scorpion 1 and 2 at Abydos. So probably somewhere in Abydos is also the tomb of Scorpion 1. So we do have lots and lots of, say, extra evidence besides just the Turin Papyrus. But again, too, most of our evidence for these kings is going to come from potsherds, numerically. And it's just one of those things that, you know, there's just so many potsherds with their names inscribed on it, you can't help it. And it's names that are done in a Horus Serek. And a Horus Serek, before we had, say, the cartouche, and most people don't get that Egyptian kings did not always use cartouches. The earliest cartouche is, I believe, Dynasty 3. But before then, they had a different sort of cartouche-like thing called a serek. And a serek is shaped kind of like the facade of a mansion or a palace with the Horus bird on top. So this is why you would often see kings named like Hor, Eri or Eri Hor, or say Hor Re is another Dynasty Zero king. So, you know, we got lots of extra evidence for these kings. As I said, and we've even found some of their tombs, which is really cool. I mean, it's really awesome. Last time I was at Abydos, I really wanted to visit those tombs, but they closed the area off, so, you know, there was no visiting those tombs at those times. You have to pretty much get there. You have to be very, very lucky when they got those tombs open that you can actually go and wander between the tombs and actually have a look at them. They're not deep tombs. You know, they're not underground. They're kind of like above ground mastabas. So, you know, you look at it. They're not impressive. They're not impressive, though. Those tombs are very. You can see they're kind of like multi-celled. They're big. They're squarish. They've got like several rooms without doors in it, so they were apparently built up and then filled from the top down. So as far as I know, there's no Dynasty Zero pharaoh called Elephant or Crocodile, but there's definitely Scorpion, there's definitely Horus, there's definitely Re, there's a one called Ka. So yeah, they're and definitely two Scorpion kings. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Very interesting question.
Moses asked the Scorpion King was believed to be of Semitic origin, right?
Probably not. There's nothing here that really suggests that the Scorpion King was of Semitic origin. It's just we don't have that evidence. We don't have that evidence. That evidence is just not there. So I know there's lots of people who claim it. I mean, you get various groups that are claiming various things, but you know, there's really nothing here that I mean, there's some people have suggested that whenever you start talking about scorpions and snakes, and there's the Semitic Semitic spells that ward off against scorpions and snakes. So there's been people who've been tempted to say, oh, well, because we have spells of scorpions and snakes, that Scorpion King may also be Semitic. But, that's really thin evidence. The fact is that the Egyptians had more than enough of their own particular animistic deities that they didn't need the Semites to give them that. So anyway, all right, so that's the last non-super chat. Now let's get into the super chats because we got a lot of them tonight. Our first one is from Cam Britt for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts on Matthew 1:23's use of Isaiah 7:14? Is Matthew implying additional messianic meaning like a dual fulfillment? Okay, well, let's bring up our Bible again. And we're back in Isaiah. And probably the same passage here. Yes. This is talking about that Syria-Ephraimite war that we talked about just a little earlier. So here we got 7, and we'll go to verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she shall call his name Emmanuel. Okay. So that is the prophecy of Isaiah 7:14. By the way, can we find that other one name down lower? No. All right. Another time, I guess. All right. So anyway, so that's Isaiah 7:14, and Matthew 1:23. Matthew 1:23. All right. And it says, behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which translates means God with us. Okay. Now, Matthew here is not alone in thinking that Isaiah 7:14 is messianic. There had been other commentaries of the Second Temple period who also thought that this was messianic. So there is a dual fulfillment, and we have already discussed that amphibole. So we do see that happening here, and Matthew is drawing on that amphibole here. The sort of the bone of contention on 7:14 is always going to be over that word that means virgin or young woman, alma. In the Greek, it uses parthenos, from which we also get, like, for example, parthenogenesis, which is virgin birth. So Matthew is taking a very, very finer interpretation of that than, say, the broader Hebrew. Now, this is not uncommon in Hebrew. It's very, very common for Hebrew to be vague enough that you can have multiple meanings assigned to the same word. And Alma is both a young woman and a virgin. It can be either. And context is going to be everything here. So, one of the things that you've got to keep in mind, for example, with Isaiah, go back to Isaiah here. Isaiah 7:14 is that this is a sign. This is supposed to be a sign. He says, in Isaiah says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. If this is just a young woman conceiving, in a marital situation, that's not a sign. That's an everyday event. Okay? This is supposed to be a sign. It's supposed to be something divine. Something extraordinary. A young woman who's married and conceives, that's not extraordinary. That's not a sign. That's everyday life. That happens. Yeah, happy for her, but, it's not a sign. Okay? So, in order for you to take this as a sign, a miraculous sign, an event that isn't normally supposed to happen, you are almost, you are supposed to take this as if it is a parthenogenic, at least a sign of something extraordinary happening here. So, just to give Isaiah 7:14 its proper due, you are almost led to Matthew's interpretation of this. So I don't think, yes, there is a amphibole here. There's a dual fulfillment. It's not fulfilled during the reign of King Hezekiah, because the other child is born because of Hezekiah's lack of faithfulness. But Matthew is trying to bring out that particular meaning of it. And again, it's a sign. It's supposed to be something spectacular. So if it's just ordinary conception and childbirth, that's not spectacular. That's normal. So again, the word here for virgin is ambiguous. All young women are virgins, but not all virgins are young women necessarily. So again, we have to take the whole thing in its context and what you're supposed to get out of this. So yes, Matthew is relying on that amphibole, but then again, so is the original writer. The original writer, Isaiah, is also relying on that amphibole to convey two possible outcomes here to Hezekiah's decisions. One that could be fulfilled immediately, or potentially far off in the future. And, recontextualization of prophecy is not something that's new. It's something that we find frequently in prophetic texts. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Next is Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was Jeremiah prophesying 70 years under Babylon or 70 years of Babylonian rule after the Assyrians in Jeremiah 25, 8-11? All right, let's pull up the Bible again and let's take a look at Jeremiah 25. Jeremiah 25, 8-11. All right. Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, because you have not obeyed my words. Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, declares the Lord, and I will send Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land, against its inhabitants, and against all these nations around you, and I will utterly destroy them, and make them a horror and a hissing and an everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will take from them from the voice of joy and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstone and the light of the lamp, and the whole land shall be desolation and horror. These nations shall serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Okay. This is essentially 70 years after essentially the fall of Jerusalem. So this is one of those things that's when the Assyrians fall to the Babylonians, almost immediately all the previous Assyrian territories are immediately annexed. Okay, the fall of the Assyrian state um, uh, under what's his name now? Oh. Ashurbanipal II. Okay, Ashurbanipal II. When Ashurbanipal II loses the war to Nebuchadnezzar II, almost instantaneous, all the lands that had been conquered by the Assyrians immediately, basically, were ceded to the Babylonians. The Babylonians did not have to go back and conquer them; they pretty much immediately took them over. So at this point, the northern kingdom of Israel had already, with the fall of Assyrian rule, become a part of the Babylonian territories. So that was almost an instantaneous thing. And that's because there was nobody at the top anymore. There was nobody pulling the strings. So, with that happening, essentially Nebuchadnezzar just sort of glided through the Assyrian territories until he started encountering new territories that weren't part of Assyrian rule. And this is where, say, the kingdom of Judah comes in, because it's the kingdom of Judah who is now having to face exile. Because already during, say, Assyrian rule, much of the northern kingdom of Israel had already been exiled. They've been moved around the Assyrian empire. So the worst had already happened to the northern kingdom. This is a warning to the kingdom of Judah to basically say, hey, you didn't listen to the Lord? Judgment's coming. Judgment is coming. And it's coming through my servant Nebuchadnezzar. So this is aimed at Judah. This is not aimed at the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom has already had they've already been beaten and exiled. It's only at this point that Nebuchadnezzar will come, conquer Judah, take the captives like Daniel, like Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and they're going to be exiled. The best of the best, Judah's best fine young people are going to be exiled to Babylon, and those people are going to live in Babylon for 70 years. So that's what's going to happen here. Is that this is where it sort of ends up being the punishment, and it's really focused upon the kingdom of Judah. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate the question. Okay, Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, is Deuteronomy 31:24-26 a good precept for Colossians 2:14-16? Is it saying that the laws of the covenant were not inside the Ark of the Covenant, the Ten Commandments, but on the side of the Ark are not required? Okay, now we have to understand that when, say, the Pentateuch uses Torah, law, it can mean several different things. Again, we're dealing with the vagueness of the Hebrew language. So, in the case of Deuteronomy, let's see, Deuteronomy 31:24. Okay. And the text reads, "And it came about when Moses finished the words of this law in a book until they were complete, that Moses commanded the Levites who carry the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may remain there as a witness against you." Okay. Now, this is not the Ten Commandments. This is these are the written documents that make up the Torah. That's what this is. So he's not talking about here the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are already inside the Ark of the Covenant at this time. So at that point, this is talking about something else. This is the writings that Moses had kept throughout his 40 years wandering in the Sinai. So it's at that is put on beside the Ark of the Covenant. Now, there are several things that are placed alongside the Ark of the Covenant, but not inside the Ark of the Covenant. The piece of Aaron's rod is one. The jar of manna is another. The ashes of the red heifer is another. So we do have these artifacts that show the miraculous things that God has done that are not inside the ark, but they're placed before the ark. So that, this is what we call in reciprocal economy. Essentially, you praise a god by using the stuff from his miraculous acts. So you place the stuff from his miraculous acts before the god, so that the god takes that and does more miraculous acts. So you're giving God here the only thing that is really worthy of praising God of, which is his miraculous deeds. So that's kind of what's going on here, is that the words of the law, of this law, that were kept in the book, this is opposed to the Ten Commandments, which are on 2 tablets inside the ark, are also seen as a miraculous thing. And those things are being placed alongside the other miraculous objects. And I'm using miraculous here kind of loosely, but things that God had a hand in. They're things that God had a hand in. So, they're not required to be inside the ark. So as far as that goes, it's not saying that. Now, as far as Colossians 2, let's take a look at Colossians chapter 2 here. 2:14 to 16. And that text reads, having cancelled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which were hostile to us, he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. When he had dismissed the rulers and authorities, he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them through him. Therefore, let no one act as your judge regarding food or drink, or in respect to a festival, new moon, or Sabbath day. Okay. Now, we do have to understand here that the context of this passage is a lot narrower. This is talking about ceremonial law. Again, remember, I said we have to be careful about how we use the term law, because law has many meanings in Hebrew. You have the Ten Commandments. That's the law. You have the Torah, which is, say, the 5 books of the Pentateuch. That's also called the law. You also have, say, the ceremonial law, and it's sometimes just called the Torah as well, the law. Okay? So context really matters here. So one of the things I would say here is that Deuteronomy, the book that was written by Moses in Deuteronomy 31, is a lot more expansive than what's being referenced here in Colossians 2. So I would be careful trying to use Deuteronomy 3 as a precept for Colossians 2. Because I think Colossians 2 is being very, very narrow here as to basically kinds of ceremonial laws or festivals that are matters of conscience, as opposed to Deuteronomy, which is much, much more expansive, and even the Torah, which is much, much more expansive as to what kind of laws it includes. It not only includes, say, ceremonial laws and festivals, but also includes, say, matters of criminal law. And these how you conduct a society within the theocratic state of Israel. So I think there's enough apples versus oranges here that I think one is not a good precept for the other. But I know there are probably some exegetes who disagree with me here also. So mileage will vary with the exegete. So anyway, that's my opinion on it. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. All right. Now, this one I'm looking forward to. When I saw this question, I just said, wow, that is a great question. From Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, does Job 39:14-17 accurately describes the behavior nature of ostriches, or is it meant to be read for theological purposes only? Laugh out loud. I wanted to ask this question for so long, just kept forgetting. All right, let's actually go here to Job, and let's read the passage first. Job 39. 14-17. Okay. All right. Ostrich. Talking about ostriches. For she abandons her eggs to the earth and warms them in the dust, and she forgets that a foot may crush them or that a wild beast may trample them. She treats her young cruelly as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, she is unconcerned because God has made her forget wisdom and has not given her a share of understanding. Okay. Now, you go to atheist sites, and it'll talk about Bible contradictions, and it'll talk about ostriches, being great parents, and, that this flies in the face of biology. Well, it's really more complicated than that. There's a book by Princeton University Press by the name of the author is Brian Bertram, and it is called the Ostrich Communal Nesting System, and it was published in 1992. Fascinating book. You get a view of ostriches you never thought you'd ever get. Okay? Now, it is true that ostriches can act as to protect their nest and parental. But it's more complicated than that. And it's more complicated because the relationship between ostriches and their offspring is complicated. The way ostriches mate is they're polygamous. They're polygamous. You have one male ostrich, then you have a dominant hen, and then 4 or 5 minor hens. And they all share one nest. They all share one nest. So what happens is, you get this situation where the young are actually most cared for by the male. The male cares for the young. Bertram noted that of the incubation of the eggs, 71% of the time is spent by the male incubating the eggs. The remaining 29% is incubated by the dominant female, the dominant hen. The other hens, the minor hens, account for 0% of the incubation duties. 0. And yet, they put their eggs in that nest also. Okay? So then you get this really situation then. Now, we have to understand that the purpose of incubation in an ostrich nest is not to warm the eggs, but to cool them. The big problem for ostrich eggs is essentially heat death. You put them on the hot sand, they basically fry. Okay? And what ends up happening is a nest can only accommodate at most 20 eggs. Now, the largest nest that has been discovered with ostrich eggs has been, I think, 71. So what happens in these situations where you've got a larger clutch of eggs than can be properly incubated? Well, the dominant female sorts them out. The dominant hen can tell her eggs from the minor hens. And she essentially kicks out the minor hen's eggs onto the sand. What do the minor hens do about this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They're just hoping that the minor hens are playing this sort of reproductive game where they might be able to slip in an egg or two that might hatch and come to maturity, but it's not a guarantee. It's a risk. Dominant hen's eggs get priority. Okay. So, when we look at a passage like this, we have to understand that what we're seeing here is observed behavior. So, in Job chapter 39, verse 14, she abandons her eggs to the earth. Well, you know what? Does she forget her eggs? Well, the minor hens do. And warms them in the dust. Well, the warming of an ostrich egg is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And the dominant hen will kick out eggs and let them roll in the dust to fry. 15, and she forgets that a foot may crush them. Forgets meaning here to just simply, ignore. What's that? What are these eggs to the dominant female? Nothing. They're minor hen's eggs. Or that wild beast may trample them. And it is true that the vast majority of ostrich eggs don't make it to maturity. Most of them end up being predated. And it is true that also that the dominant male and the male and the dominant female, dominant hen, do sometimes abandon their nests. Sometimes it is a ruse to distract a predator. Sometimes they're frightened off by a larger predator like a lion or something like that. So it is definitely within, say, it doesn't happen often, but the so-called loyal parents here of the male and the dominant hen do sometimes abandon nests. Verse 16, she treats her young with cruelties as if they're not hers. It is true that for the first few weeks of infancy for ostriches, they are entirely taken care of by the male. The male takes care of the birds, the young chicks, and then a few weeks later, it's like throws them out because the breeding cycle begins over again. And once the breeding cycle begins again, the hens become hostile to the chicks. So it's absolutely true that there is an aspect to this that's not unexpected, not unrealistic. Though her labor be in vain, she is unconcerned. Well, that's definitely true of the minor hens. Definitely, the minor hens lay their eggs in that nest and take their chances. They put in no care. They if the eggs get booted out of the nest, oh well. So, 17, because God has made her forget wisdom and has not given her a share of understanding. Okay. Now, how much of this is theological? How much of this is meant to be observational behavior? It's hard to say here because we don't think of animals having large amounts of wisdom anyway. Okay. But we do expect a sort of natural wisdom that comes from the natural world. This is part of natural or general revelation. So, we do look at certain animals, and they do seem to have certain wisdom in certain contexts. And things that we would expect, for example, of a chicken, we don't see in say, an ostrich. So, there's a theological bent here. There is definitely a theological bent. But it's also true that, given that we're dealing with a polygamous animal here, that isn't that unexpected that we would see this sort of theological analysis happening from what is observed from nature. So anyway, again, this was a fascinating question, absolutely fascinating question. Haven't had this question before. Great question. This has been my favorite of the night so far. This was just priceless. So yeah, there's something to this. There's definitely something to this. It's not as black and white as a lot of say skeptics suggest. Ostriches are not ideal parents. They're not ideal parents, not by a long shot. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated.
Okay. Jacob Balcom says, question, how on earth do you know such niche topics as ostrich polygamy so as to answer this question on the fly?
Well, I read voraciously. I have to note that this is not my area of expertise. I was a biochemistry major in my undergrad. I do remember some of it. I do read very widely. Very, very widely. So, all right, Brick. What the Lord gives, He also taketh away. So, Brick Creation, thank you very much for your $10 super chat here. And he asks, did you read up on Josephus' War, Jews 653, Tacitus Histories 513, mentioning an army in the skies with chariots, found in Eusebius and Yossipon? Also recorded this event, possible Revelation 19, 11 to 16. Unfortunately, I have not been able to look them up yet. So, I can't really answer this. So while you got a great answer to the last question, this one I'm going to have to give this one a pass again, because I haven't actually gotten to doing that reading yet. So, sorry, you don't win them all. But I have to admit, I loved that question on the ostriches. That was just fascinating question. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to disappoint you here on Josephus and Tacitus here. So, but anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, next super chat is from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. A friend recently told me she was a Calvinist. Okay. Could you explain to the TULIP and whether or not it's biblical? Okay. Calvinism is an acceptable position within Christian Orthodoxy. Okay? Now, the TULIP is an anachronism, and it was an anachronism actually started by Jacobus Arminius. It was actually not an acronym that was started by Calvinists. It was used by Arminius to describe Calvinist theology. And the acronym, the T stands for total depravity. And the U is unconditional election. The L is limited atonement. The I is irresistible grace. The P is the perseverance of the saints. Okay? Now, like any theological position, you get extremes. The extremes can be unbiblical, even if, say, the original doctrine fits within the scope of Christian orthodoxy. Now, the rub here is always what is meant by this acronym. And one of the things we have to understand was that Jacobus Arminius was a student and hired by Theodore Beze to basically, Theodore Beze basically said, come up with a standard theology for Calvinism. Theodore Beze was a student of John Calvin. So that's sort of the trajectory there. Now, it's debatable whether Calvin held to all 5 points, and this is what's a 5-point Calvinist is someone who holds to all 5 of these points. So you'll sometimes hear like 5-point, 4-point, even 3-point Calvinists who will just take some of these and basically hold to them. And there's still technically, even a 3-point Calvinist can still be technically a Calvinist, even though he is not necessarily, he won't ever make the jump to, say, Arminianism or even Molinism. That's now the third alternative now. But the total depravity, it doesn't mean that you're completely wicked and there's no good in you. It just means that you are incapable of reaching God by your own good merit. There's not enough good in you to make it to God on your own. You need help. So that's what's meant by total depravity. The unconditional election is the idea that God, say, arbitrarily decides between who's going to be saved and who isn't. And, if you can accept that God does anything arbitrarily and without having any reasons for doing it, well, I mean, that's one of those that I think is a debatable point. The limited atonement. The limited atonement is one of those ideas where avoids the problem of double jeopardy. And the idea here is that the sacrifice of Christ was limited to those that would be saved. And the reason why is if God died for the sins, and notice there's going to be a difference here between sin and sins. If Christ died for the sins of the wicked, and the wicked go to, say, hell, they're going to be paying for something that Christ already paid for. Well, if Christ already paid for it, there's going to be added judgment to that. So this gets out of the sort of the concept of, say, double jeopardy. Basically, Christ only paid for those that he would save. Okay. The irresistible grace is the idea that once God selects you to be saved, you will go and become saved, because God has taken your worthless dead corpse and breathed new life into it. And finally, the perseverance of the saints is the idea that once you have taken that path on the road of Christ, that God will keep you on that road of Christ. Now, among these, it's debatable whether or not Calvin believed all 5 of these. It's a highly debated subject, and many have suggested that Calvin was not a 5-point Calvinist. So, and it's very, very clear that much of what TULIP is really Theodore Beze's understanding of Calvinism, not so much what Calvin believed. Because you read Calvin's words, and Calvin is a lot more nuanced about this stuff. He's a lot more nuanced. Like, for example, the perseverance of the saints. Calvin pretty much says, well, as long as you stay on the road of righteousness, God will keep you on the road of righteousness. Well, that's very, very different than, say, Theodore Beze's sort of more view of this, which is more along the lines of that God's going to keep you on there regardless. Calvin didn't have that view. Calvin's view was a lot more reticent than Beze's. So, whether or not that's going to, ultimately, whether or not you consider that biblical, I'll leave that up to you. I think it's biblical. I think it is within the pale of Christian orthodoxy, just like I think Arminianism and Molinism are within the pale of Christian orthodoxy. I think hyper-Calvinism is outside, is unbiblical. I think hyper-Arminianism is unbiblical. There are derivations of Molinism that are unbiblical. Okay? It's the extremes here that are going to be unbiblical. But straight up, classical Calvinism is not unbiblical per se. It's an acceptable position within Christian orthodoxy. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. The next super chat. Does Genesis 15:7-8 contradict Exodus 6:3? Okay. I know where you're going with this one. Okay. Genesis. Let's get our Bible up here. Genesis 15:7-8. Okay, and the text says, "And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. And he said, O Lord God, how may I know that I shall possess it?" All right. Okay, and I'm just going to take a quick peek at the Hebrew here just to make sure I'm saying this all right. So, just, okay. Adonai Yahweh. Okay, excellent. Because that's going to be the bone of contention, is the use of Yahweh right here. That's going to be the contradiction that tends to be brought out here. So I'm going to go back to the NASB, and we'll go now to Exodus 6. Oops. 6 verse 3. I will start 2. God spoke further to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord, Yahweh. And I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty by my name, the Lord, and he uses the word here, Yahweh, again. I did not make myself known to them. All right. Now, there's a couple things that could be going on here. Now, there have been many people have tried to reconcile this in ways, and I don't really have a super dogmatic position on this. Now, Michael Heiser has tried the solution of turning this into a question. Basically, where he takes verse 3 and he says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as the Lord Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, did I not make myself known to them? Okay. My problem with Heiser's solution here, as you can apply this to any passage to flip it on its head. He is technically right that a passage can be turned into a question without a interrogative marker. So he's right about that. The question is that a good solution every time you get a conflict? Because you can start doing some really hinky stuff with this technique. So I am not comfortable with Heiser's solution here. I am much more comfortable with the idea that Genesis 15 is a retrojection. Now, what is a retrojection? A retrojection is when you update somebody's words with a new understanding or as they should have been, said. Okay? So I'm at this point, I tend to more lean towards the idea that Genesis 15 is not actually quoting us the exact words of God and Abraham, but it is quoting us the words as they should have been for the reader at that time. So what's happening is Moses is trying to connect Genesis 15 and the Abraham narratives with the identity of Yahweh. with the understanding that those may not be the exact words. Okay? So we have to understand, too, that back in the ancient Near East, they didn't have that idea of say, contradictory speech. That wasn't something that you had in the ancient world. They would sometimes change things to reflect a didactic understanding. We see this often in names. Like, for example, Nabal. In the book of Samuel. Where King David is he asks Nabal for food and lodging for his men, and Nabal goes, "Who's this David guy to me?" Well, the word Nabal wasn't his original name, in all likelihood, because Nabal means fool. It means fool. No mother calls her son fool. That's not a name you get at birth. That's a name you earn in life. So, Israelite writers were apt to tweak things here and there for specific purposes. So right now I tend to lean more towards the idea that Genesis, the speech in Genesis 15 was meant to make that solid link between the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, as he's being relayed to us in Exodus 6. So essentially, Exodus 6 is not a contradiction of Genesis 15, 7 to 8. It's essentially Genesis 15, 7 to 8 is being reinterpreted through the sight of Genesis 6. So I hope that made sense, and I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and then next super chat of Camel Leopard again. All right, for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was Moses' father-in-law's name Reuel? Exodus 2:18. Jethro? Exodus 3:1. Or Hobad? Judges 4:11. Okay. I'm just going to look up the Judges 4:11 here. Yeah. The sons of Hobad, father-in-law of Moses. Okay. Now, a lot of this is going to depend upon which exegetes you look up, what the explanation is. All three names are used of Moses' father-in-law. Okay? We also know, though, that Moses had more than one wife. He had more than one wife. Because we have in, say, Numbers chapter 12, where Moses has a conflict with Miriam and Aaron over marrying the Cushite woman. Okay? That happens, that marriage with the Cushite woman happens during the wandering in the Sinai. This is after he marries the daughter of Reuel. Okay? So there's many things going on here. Now, was it the fact that Moses' wives didn't live long because the environment was harsh? Could be. The whole generation died out in the Sinai. So, yeah, eventually his wives would have had to die out too. Is this because he had more than one wife at a time? It's possible. It's possible. It was permitted, multiple being one man being married to more than one woman was permitted in the Torah, but he had to take care of them all. Okay. So this is something exegetes will debate. Now, more evangelical exegetes will tend to say, "Oh, it's the same name or multiple names for the same person." Multiple names for the same person. So you'll find that more in, say, fundamentalist and evangelical commentaries. But you won't really find that in critical commentaries. And I really don't think I don't think that's a satisfactory explanation either, to be honest. Because we do have, as I say, records of Moses marrying more than once. So if he married more than once, he's got to have more than one father-in-law. So I think it's a matter here of that Moses married multiple times and thus has more than one father-in-law. So that's my opinion on this. As I say, this will be vehemently disagreed with if you, say, go to a Old Testament prophet, say Liberty University. But, they have their own opinion on these things. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated and interesting question. Okay, Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think the paradise Yeshua referred to in Luke 23 was? I've seen theories ranging from Abraham's bosom, heaven, and Eden. Okay. Well, what I think Paradisio is basically talking about here is, if I'm correct, let me just double check the text. It's always good to double check the text. If I'm correct, this is talking about Abraham. Let's see, Paradisio. Here. All right, this is the crucifixion. Okay, yeah. Luke 23 verse 43. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. All right. And verse 3, see, Jesus is talking to the thief on the cross, and he says, truly, truly, I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. And the word is paradisos, which is paradise, a park, nice place. Okay, now, there are a variety of theories. I don't think it's heaven yet. Okay. And that's because until Christ descends to the underworld, the captives will not set free. Okay. It's not Eden. Eden was destroyed during the flood. Okay. So it's not Eden. So that sort of leaves the two possibilities of heaven, really, and Abraham's bosom. Now, Abraham's bosom is another name for essentially the good compartment of Sheol, and Sheol meaning the grave. The big sort of theological conundrum in Judaism is that the dead couldn't go to heaven because they were sinful, and sinful dead sin could not be in the presence of divinity. So they went to the grave instead. You had the bad people in the bad half of the grave. You had the good people in Abraham's bosom. And it's separated by a gulf. And this is Second Temple period cosmology. So, and this is where we get to say the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. That's a snapshot of Abraham's bosom. So it was also seen, though, that part of the grave was seen as a nice place. There was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't heaven. It wasn't being present with the Lord. So it was better than the other half on the other side of the river, but it wasn't bad. It definitely wasn't bad. So it was seen as a kind of paradise, for the righteous. So I think in this case that Jesus is specifically talking about Abraham's bosom, specifically. But their stop in Abraham's bosom would be probably very, very short-lived at least. So you could extend this to also mean heaven as well, as in, Christ descends down to Abraham's bosom, sets the captives free, and then they all go to heaven, and then that compartment is vacated. So that's probably the best I can answer this at the moment. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Watched first anime the other day. Your Lie in April. Loved it. Ended how I wanted it. Start to finish. Haven't been that happy in a long time. Any personal recommendations you would recommend? Oh, Your Lie in April was heart-wrenching. It was heart-wrenching. Wow. It didn't leave me happy. I mean, I read both the manga and I saw the video, the anime, and it tore the heart out of my chest, threw it on the ground, and stomped on it. Oh wow, that was heartbreaking. I mean, it was excellent. It was absolutely excellent, but it was also absolutely heartbreaking. Now, there are other anime I do recommend. There's several great anime movies like Akira. That's a classic. The Wings of Hanamise is an excellent movie. It's one of the best anime movies ever done. There's also several other great series you can watch. There's lots of Gundam out there. I mean, I'm a big fan of Gundam. I recommend Gundam. A good recent anime is Black Lagoon. It's violent. Warn you of this. Very, very violent. But it's also very good. The writing is excellent on that as well. Another one I would recommend is... let's see here. There's another one here that's just escaping my mind. If you want one that's kind of fun, there's a series from the 90s called Tenchi Muyo. Very fun series. Excellent series, very, very fun. So it's a lot of this is going to depend upon your tastes, whether or not you like science fiction, whether or not you like drama, whether or not you like there's an anime to cover just about any taste. So if you like a little bit of surreal stuff, maybe The Girl That Leapt Through Time is also good. So yeah, there's a lot of really, really good anime out there. So it's a whole different world of entertainment. It really is. So anyway, I will probably leave it at that. So you've got a few recommendations out of me there. But yeah, lots of great anime out there. Highly recommend it. It's but again, not all of it is for, say, you do have to be careful. You get reviews of what you're going to watch before, so you kind of know what you're going to know what to expect a little bit. Because not all of it is PG-13. Be straight up about that. So, but it is a different way of telling stories than, the other one I read highly recommend, Death Note. Death Note is excellent. The original series, don't watch the movie. The movie's horrible. Okay, but Death Note is excellent. The original series is excellent. Tokyo Ghoul, also very good. Also very good. So, there's some anime recommendations for you. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. All right. WQ for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Who united Upper and Lower Egypt, and how was it achieved? Okay, now, we know from, say, the Scorpion Mace Head and the Narmer Palette that Upper and Lower Egypt were not united under, say, one king. It was actually a set of wars. Sometimes this is called the Unification Wars that happened at the end of Dynasty 0 and into Dynasty 1. Now, it used to be thought that Narmer united Upper and Lower Egypt, and now more people are leaning towards, say, King Aha as being, say, the first king that actually achieved unification. Narmer seems to have been Aha's predecessor and the last king of Dynasty 0. Now, there are still people out there that say that Narmer and Aha are the same. That's getting less and less of an opinion these days in Egyptology. Part of the reason is that we found 2 separate tombs for both men. So, there's enough, I think, evidence to suggest that they were 2 different people, and that both played a part in the unification wars. Both were kings of Upper Egypt, and both engaged in the process of unifying Upper and Lower Egypt. But I think it was ultimately King Aha who succeeded in basically conquering Lower Egypt, and it was a conquest. That's how it was done. So essentially, Upper Egypt conquered Lower Egypt, and then unified the 2 lands. So that's probably the best we can surmise at this point in time, without more texts or more artifacts. But it's highly suggestive that this was a process that took many generations, many kings to do. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, and twitch it up. Okay, and then let's see here. We have a super chat from Cam Britt for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could there be any truth to the extra-biblical idea that David and Solomon were exorcists? Does 1 Samuel 16:23 hint towards this? Now, let's take a look at that passage. Okay, so we got 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 16 and verse 23. Okay, so it came about whenever the evil spirit from God came to Saul, David would take the harp and play it with his hand. The evil here is inferred. It just says a spirit. So it's ruach. The evil is inferred. Play it with his hand, and Saul would be refreshed and be well. And then the evil spirit, now we get the evil spirit, the ra'ah, would depart from him. Okay. Now, there is the whole concept in there is, can God send an evil spirit to do his bidding? Well, he can certainly allow it to happen, and in that respect, where it's his sovereign second cause, then yes, definitely God can say, spirit comes and volunteers, hey, I want to torment this king of yours, this Saul guy. And God can go, yeah, sure, go ahead. So that's within say divine sovereignty and divine prerogative there. But as far as David and Solomon being exorcists, there doesn't seem to have been. This isn't so much a driving out of the spirit. This is more a sort of soothing of Saul's temperament so that the spirit would flee. So, I think here the evidence that David and Solomon were exorcists is thin. So I'd be very, very careful here to import the idea here that they were exorcists. I don't think there's enough evidence here to warrant this. So that's... Yeah, I don't think it hints that. I don't think the hint is at least compelling enough for me. It's not compelling enough for me. So anyway, but it does say, there is an old adage, music soothes the savage beast. And Saul was dealing with personal demons that were more than just evil spirits. So this is one of those things where Saul had his own problems, and he would go into fits over it. So yeah, absolutely. It could be palliative, and yet still not be exorcism as such. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, and our next super chat is from Matthew Harrell for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. I hope all is well. Well, I'm still recovering a bit from the Rona. In fact, I'm feeling a little lightheaded at the moment, so, if I'm slur some words, okay, understand. I am going to try to make it through all the super chats tonight, but we might not go on too much longer after that. So we are going to do our best to get through everything. Will you please put Leviticus 17:7 into ancient Near Eastern perspective? What is meant by devils here? Okay, let's go to Leviticus 17. Leviticus 17. Okay, and let's get that Bible up. And the text says, "And they shall no longer sacrifice their sacrifices to the goat demons, which they play the harlot. This shall be a permanent statute to them through their generations." Okay. The idea here is Sa'ir. It's a male goat. It doesn't actually say devil. It's actually a goat, male goat. But the implication here is that this is not just a goat with horns and wool and that sort of thing. No, it's not that. It is the idea that the goat here is representing something demonic. Okay? And that they're playing harlot with it, and they mean here a spiritual harlotry, not a physical harlotry. It's the idea of spiritual fornication, not physical fornication. Okay, so it's the idea that that these people were once worshiping a certain kind of demonic spirit, but that demonic spirit that was, say, more representative of at least in some sort of character by a goat, but it is not exactly clear what is being referred to here. So this is one of those things that exegetes do debate. So, and sometimes we have to accept that. Now there is the idea too that that goats could also be the carrier of sin. We see this in, like, for example, scapegoat. At Yom Kippur, where you have two animals sacrificed. You have the sacrificial lamb, and then you have the scapegoat. And the sins of the people are placed upon the goat, and the goat's driven out into the wilderness, where it is, supposedly, meets its fate, whatever that fate is. And that's supposed to carry off the sins of the people. So, the whole idea that goats, say, represent, just, a variety of spiritual entities is, something that actually carries on throughout the history of Israel. It's not just here in Leviticus where it's talking about, say, spirits, goat spirits per se, or at least the demonic aspects of the spiritual world here. But it's also has an important part in redemptive history as well. But specifically here, the prohibition is to that God is taking over for all these practices. They're no longer permitted to do this. They're no longer permitted to sacrifice to the goats, the goat spirits. Their proper form of worship now is at the tabernacle. So anyway, I hope that answers the question, at least gives some depth to it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Cataphract 3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Why do you think Daniel refused to eat from the king's table in Daniel 1, 5 through 20? Is it kosher or resistance to assimilation? Kosher. Yeah. Yeah, the Assyrians ate all sorts of nasty stuff. And you wouldn't know exactly where food came from. And you didn't have the option, if you ate at the king's table, unless you had some sort of waiver, you didn't get an option of what food you ate. So you could be served all sorts of fine delicacies, like pig. They like their pig. They might have also been served something like camel. Not kosher to eat, but very tasty if cooked right. They could have been served shellfish, seafood, it's possible. We have no idea what they were serving, but we do know it wasn't kosher. That it was not something that Daniel felt he could, in all conscience eat. So, I don't think it was resistance to assimilation. Daniel had to be assimilated. In order to serve the king in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, or any Assyrian court, one of the things we have to realize about Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, because they were servants within the royal court, they were all made eunuchs. That's right. They all had to have their testicles crushed. In order for them to be considered to be appropriate for service of a king. Okay, they weren't soldiers. They did not get the option of keeping their wedding tackle. They had, in order to become administrators within the court, they had to undergo this process. So they were assimilated. They were taught how to speak the local dialect. They were taught in the court of the king, and they were groomed to be servants of the king. But also, they were made so they wouldn't be a threat to the harem or to any of the royal court. So it's not about resistance to assimilation. They were assimilated. It was about keeping kosher, trying to keep God's laws while serving the king as well. And Daniel here finds a compromise, which is to eat vegetables. Because practically any vegetable he'll eat is going to be kosher. There's very few vegetables that are not kosher. Almost every vegetable is kosher. Not every meat is. Not by a long shot. And the more exotic the dining situation, the more chance that you're going to encounter non-kosher food. So I think that's very much plays a part here in Daniel's decision. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Next one. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, thank you. No question. Please let this sponsor a non-super chat question. Okay. Absolutely. We'll sponsor a non-super chat question with this. Let's see. Thank you very much for the super chat. And we'll find one here to sponsor. Let's see here. Let's see. Let's see here. Let's take one. Let's see here. We have been getting less and less non-super chat questions of late, so
Got a fun one.
Oh,
Courtney Thompson.
Courtney Thompson, who?
If you worshipped any of the Egyptian Ennead, which one and more?
Ooh, Courtney. Okay. If I was a pagan, huh, and if I worshipped any of the Egyptian Ennead, which one and why? Okay. It'd probably be Seth, to be honest. I've always thought that Seth was a really, really cool deity. He's a god of chaos, a god of power. He's a storm god. His worshippers were some of the few Egyptians that actually ate pork, and I'm a big fan of bacon. I mean, I cannot be without my pork. Not my pork chops, not my bacon, not my sausage. Yeah, I have a real hard time with that whole kosher thing. I'm sorry. I just cannot keep kosher. So for me, it would definitely be the god Seth. He's very interesting too. He's just very interesting, and he used to be actually a royal deity as well at one point. He was in some of the early kings we find in like the third dynasty. We see some kings revert to Seth names instead of Horus names, and he was considered to be the patron god of Lower Egypt. So, very, very interesting god. And that's why I kind of say, you know, if I was an Egyptian, that's probably who I'd end up worshipping. That or Thoth. Scribal god. Okay, god of scribes, yeah. Okay, I can see that one too. Because, you know, writing, magic, that sort of thing. Very, very interesting stuff. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. And I want to thank Jack Ray for sponsoring a non-super chat question. Very, very much appreciate that. I'm so glad you're so generous that you've not just sponsored a non super chat question, but you're also sponsoring our channel, and we really, really appreciate that. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Okay. Matthew Harrell for $10. Good to see you tonight, friend. It's been a while since we've seen you here. We very much appreciate the super chat, but we also like having you here. So I'm glad you could make it tonight. How did ancient Egyptians worship their gods? All I find are writings about pharaohs on furniture, but I don't understand what the average Egyptian. Were there any cults? Yes. Now, the average Egyptian worshipped Egyptian deities not at the main temples. They typically had private shrines. Their local village might have a shrine. They would have ancestral deities in their homes or their deities of choice. There were also, say, cults of Egypt that appealed to commoners too. Most typically, these were the Hathor cult and the cult of Thoth. Both those cults were seen as cults that appeal to the masses, not just the royalty. So, absolutely, we do find average worship among, say, normal Egyptians. You know, we find amulets of various gods in their tombs. So we do find that there is average worship, but it isn't done in the formal temples. It's almost never done in the formal temples. It's only kings and priests and, you know, the basically the upper crust got to worship in temples. Everybody else, they had to go to either the local village shrine or their own private chapels. And the gods that they worshipped there would highly depend upon who they were, what their status in life was. Like, for example, like several craftsmen at Deir al-Medina would worship Amenhotep I as a god, because he was the guy who was responsible for setting up the whole Valley of the Kings. So they worshipped him because they owed their livelihoods to him. So we do see a lot of Amenhotep I worship happening at Deir al-Medina. But we also find, ancestral gods at say, houses at Elephantine as well. So, it really depends upon, who the person is, what their status in life is, and what's their relationship with, say, local villages, etc. So, it really is common practice. We don't know unfortunately, we don't know as much about, say, average person, how they would worship as much as we know about the kings, because the kings left us a lot more. So it's just one of those things where we just don't have as much material to work with. But anyway, we have been able to piece together some of it, and it's very interesting. A lot of mud brick chapels. So, very interesting. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's great to have you here tonight, friend. Okay. Another one from Matthew Harrell for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Last question of the night. I'll be back soon. Okay, awesome. In Isaiah 13:21, are dancing goats meant to be demons? Also, is there an ancient Near Eastern way of viewing prophets? Good night, and God bless you all. Well, God bless you also, and thank you for the super chat. All right, Isaiah. I think I did mention that with the earlier super chat on the goat demon, that the goat imagery does run through Israelite history. So, the fact that it also shows up in Isaiah 13 is not surprising. And 13:21. Oops, and I keep coming up with a rabbit. There we go. Okay. Now, what we got here? Let's see. Let's look at the context here. Okay, it's definitely prophetic. Start at verse 19 here. And Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation, nor will the Arab pitch his tent there, nor the shepherds will make their flocks lie there. But the desert creatures will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will also live there, and shaggy goats will frolic there. Okay. It is the same word. It is that same word, sa'ir, that we do find of the goat demons in Leviticus 17. So it is the same word. But it's not meant to be demons here. It can just mean a goat. And I think that's really what is basically it's saying here, is that Babylon will be abandoned and it will become a home for desert creatures. Owls, ostriches, goats. Because in the next verse we see also, and the hyenas will howl in their fortified towers, and jackals in their luxurious places. Her fateful time will soon come, and her days will not be prolonged. Okay. So the passage is describing the end of Babylon, and it is doing so in a prophetic manner. So, in this particular case, the best reading here is for goats is just a goat. It's sometimes that's not as interesting, but sometimes it's the best reading. So this is not talking about goat demons. it is really talking about goats. You know, as in the type that will eat your shirt if you get too close to it. So, definitely these, and you can actually go to sites all across the all across the Middle East today and find goats just wandering all over the place. You know, goats are not necessarily being herded. You know, one of James Hoffmeyer, when he was excavating at Tel El Borg, they used to plant these flags, you know, to as site markers. You know, if you find a little, you know, piece of potsherd, you put you catalog the potsherd, and then you put a flag with the number on it. And the flag was you know, a little red flag, but it was made of cloth. Well, what would happen is at night the goats would come into the site and eat the flags. Well, they hired a native Egyptian to shoo away the goats. His job was at night to essentially shoo away the goats. Well, in the morning they came by and they found the guard asleep and the goats nibbling on the flags again. Eventually, what they did was they replaced the cloth flags with plastic, and that solved the problem ultimately. But yeah, goats wander all over the place. You know, when I was at the Temple of Khnum at Elephantini, you know, it was a hot day. You know, I'd done a morning shoot of photography there, and some of the guards, you know, they were bored. The guards were really bored. And so they invited me to have tea with them. And so I sat down and had tea with these antiquities guards. And as I was having a tea in the gazebo, all of a sudden, this herd of goats comes running through the gazebo. They don't care I'm there. They're just whipping on through. There's no shepherd. There's no one tending these goats. There's just wild goats running around. So, yeah, you get a lot of goats when you visit, you know, the Near East. You know, and it was true back then that wild goats were around, and it's pretty true today as well. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Gave you a couple of little stories there of my experience with goats, and a little bit of an archaeology tale as well. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. We have a $10 super chat from Cole Walker. No question. Was there a question that went with that? I don't see a question going with that. Thank you very much for the super chat. If there was a question, alert us and we'll answer it. But anyway, we do appreciate the support. We're grateful for all of you who have supported this channel financially. It really helps us. It really helps us. We couldn't basically meet our bills without this. So we are very, very grateful, and we don't take any super chat lightly. It's just we understand that people are giving sacrificially to help us out to create more content, and we are doing our best to produce the finest content we can, as far as what we can do for you know, for in return for your great generosity. So again, thank you very much for the super chat. Oh, he answered. He says, "Too tired for a question tonight." Well, I can appreciate that. Really, I can. You know, I understand that. You know, I do a full day's work and then I come home and I do this, and it is exhausting. It is exhausting, especially when you're coming off of an illness like I am. So, but I thank you very much for that. He says, "Just an appreciation super chat tonight." Wow, thank you so much. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, as I said, it does really help us. So thank you so very much. Okay, where are we here? Okay. Next one is from Amir Eshifra for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What does the grammar and morphology of the language of the Hyksos tell us about the branch of the Semitic language family that it most likely is from? Okay, now we don't have...
Wait. Sorry. I don't know why that's...
Technical problems.
Storytelling is incredibly important in public speaking.
Okay.
What the hell?
So, we don't actually have a lot from the Hyksos, unfortunately. We do have some names. We do have some scarabs. We have a few very, very small texts. Not enough to get a grammar off of, unfortunately. But we do know some things. We do know it's Semitic. We do know that they used Amoritic imperfective names. Okay? Now, Amoritic imperfective names does seem to be a function of languages that have had at least some influence with Amorite. So the Amorite dialect of West Semitic languages. Okay? So Hebrew is in that category as well. Hebrew also has Amoritic imperfective names. This is one of the reasons why we have a pretty good guess that even without, say, the more poetic passages that refer to Israelites as being descendants from Amorites, there's a language component there that also seems to allude to it as well. And that's a language component that they share with the Hyksos. Like, for example, you'll often have this, an imperfective, a verb, followed by a theophoric name. Like Jacob El. You know, and that was like El helps is my helper, you know, or El helps me or something like that. So yeah, we find these Amoritic imperfective names in the Hyksos naming nomenclature. So that does seem to suggest that they were Amorites. But that's about as far as we can tell. We don't have much more. Unfortunately, we have very, very few texts from the Second Intermediate period. So, unfortunately, that's about as far as we get with this. So, it does appear to be Western Semitic. It does seem to be from the Amoritic branch of Western Semitic. But that's about it. That's about all we can tell. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Biblical Brainstorm for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are the weirdest Egyptian texts you've read? Weirdest Egyptian texts? Oh, I know. I know the weirdest Egyptian text that I read, which was Papyrus Westcar. Papyrus Westcar. With the magician, where he has an unfaithful wife, and he tries to prove it by summoning a crocodile, and he walks backwards to the river, takes a wax crocodile, and throws it over his shoulder into the river. Yes, it's magic, but it just reads so weird. It's so alien. That you just don't, you just see, oh my gosh, am I really reading? Is he really walking backwards? Why is he walking backwards? Why does he have a wax crocodile? Like, what? And why is he throwing it over his shoulder? It's just the strangest text. Especially when you're first learning Egyptian, and you read Papyrus Westcar and you just go, dang, there's some strange stuff in here. There's some real strange stuff. So yes, Papyrus Westcar is the weirdest text I think I've read in Egyptian. Bar none. It's the strangest text I've read. So anyway, that's the answer to the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Destiny Knight 77 for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hello, Dr. Folk. Thank you so much for all that you do. Your work has really inspired me. Well, thank you. That's wonderful to hear. We're hoping to inspire people. One of the things we want to do is we want to build a community of people who are interested in this stuff. Interested in the Bible, interested in the ancient Near East, interested in Egypt, interested in a little theology, history. We are a teaching channel, and the thing we want to do is inspire people to learn more. So that means a lot to us, really does. And he continues, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the census David described in 2 Samuel 24:1 and 1 Chronicles 21:1. Yes, I have some thoughts on that. Now, the Israelites were told that their kings were not supposed to take censuses, okay? Because they were not to become prideful with how many people had, okay? So it was actually a forbidden act. So, while there was a census of a sort done in numbers, that was a different kind of census. That was a census of tribes, or of clans. The census at the beginning of Numbers and the census at the end of Numbers was to show that the number of clans had not diminished, that God had preserved the number of clans. So the purpose of those censuses were to show that God had been faithful in the preservation of the family units. So that definitely is a different kind of census for a different purpose than what David had tried to do. David was trying to figure out how many people he had under his reign. And that was a no-no. He was not supposed to do that. And because he did that, he faces judgment because of it. So, he was not permitted to do that, and the kings were not supposed to do that. That was supposed to be left in God's hands, and God alone was supposed to know that. So, there's also a darker side to this as well, which is a census was also often taken for taxation purposes. We find, while David himself does not implement this, as far as we know, Solomon does. Solomon essentially uses the census that David took to tax the tribes with corvée labor. The way that taxation was done in the United Monarchy after David, during the time of Solomon, was they would basically go to the clans and they basically say, hey, you have such and such men, you need to lend these men for 2 weeks to work on my pet royal projects, like my palace, like my stables, like all those things. So that was also the reason. Part of the reason why the censuses were forbidden was to be a limiter upon the royalty's ability, the king's ability to tax. So there was actually another reason that this was a no-no, because if the king had exact numbers of people, he could tax exactly too. And the king wasn't supposed to do that. And while David himself, didn't push his limits, he didn't press his luck. He took his lumps. He did wrong, he took his lumps and went on with things, but he didn't press his luck. But Solomon did. Solomon took that census and then taxed accordingly. So those are my thoughts upon the census that was conducted by David in 2 Samuel 24:1 and 1 Chronicles 21:1. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and very much appreciated. Okay, Linguist Ammo, good to see you tonight. For $5, thank you very much. All this talk of ostriches reminds me of the debate in Monty Python and the Holy Grail between African and European swallows. Yeah. I will say this about ostriches, though. I have not had an ostrich egg. I have never eaten ostrich egg, but I've had ostrich meat. and I wasn't that fond of it, to be honest. I've eaten all sorts of things. Yes, I've eaten camels and enjoyed it immensely. But I didn't care for ostrich. Ostrich was like the driest turkey breast imaginable. It was not. I did not care for it there very much. So I have had ostrich. This was when I lived in Nevada. There was several ostrich farms in the area. And they would make leather purses from the ostrich skin, and they'd sell the eggs. Those eggs are really tough. I mean, they're really tough. So, good carving material. Yeah, absolutely. And we actually do find several artifacts we find carved ostrich eggs in Egypt too. So these are actually very, very important artifacts too. The Egyptians would find ostrich eggs, have a massive omelet, feed a village with an omelet, and then they would use the ostrich eggs for transporting water. They would also use them. They'd actually carve them to, and I think there's even a couple of these in the new National Museum in Cairo. Not the gem, the other new one. There's actually several new museums, not just the Grand Egyptian Museum, but there's several new. I think there's a national museum. I think it's called the National Museum of Egyptian Culture. That's has, I think, a couple of these carved ostrich eggs. But it's beautiful work. Some of it's crude, some of it isn't. So it depends. But very interesting stuff, though, nonetheless. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. I'm glad you were here today. It's good to have you here tonight. Okay. Colin Kraft for $20. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate this. Okay. Dr. Falk, you seem much livelier tonight than you did last week. Well, that was because I was dying last week. Does this mean you've recovered from your bout with COVID? For the most part, yeah. For the most part, I have recovered. I still have some sinus drip and some cough, some bronchitis that has resulted. This is actually normal for me. So whenever I have a flu or a cold, I usually get bronchitis. And part of that is because I have a compromised respiratory system. So COVID was a very big concern for me. It was a very big concern for me because it could have had very, very serious repercussions for somebody in my particular medical state. So, yeah, was concerned about this. Now, fortunately, it wasn't as bad as I had thought it would be. Not by a long shot. It was not as bad as whooping cough. I've had a bout of whooping cough, and that nearly killed me. That one nearly killed me. So, I take these respiratory illnesses very seriously. Very, very seriously. And I am feeling a lot better, although I'm still sort of a little peakish. As I said, I'm feeling a little lightheaded tonight. So, the fact is I haven't had dinner yet. So, I'm hungry and put in a full day's work. And I could really use a curry after this. So, I will probably be making myself some butter chicken after this. So, anyway... thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for the well wishes. Very much appreciated. Okay, and we got Courtney Thompson for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was Melchizedek Shem or a Jebusite? He was not Shem. He was a Jebusite. Now, I understand that in the Masoretic text, there is this idea that Shem lived long enough to be contemporary with Melchizedek, and therefore some Jewish sages, some Jewish rabbis have basically tried to say that Melchizedek was Shem, or Shem was Melchizedek. And I don't think that's the case. I definitely do not think that's the case. I think, first of all, the readings that we get from the Septuagint for the lifespans of the clans is a better reading. I also think too that Melchizedek is a Jebusite. Selam, Urushalem, the original city of Jerusalem, where Melchizedek was king. The name is found in the Amarna letters, and it's definitely a Jebusite city. There's no question it was a Jebusite city. And the name of Jerusalem was originally a Jebusite name. Even Melchizedek, is a Jebusite name of a Jebusite god. The god Zadok. And the name Melchizedek actually means Zadok was king, or is my king. Okay? It's a theophoric name. So I don't think there's any question that Melchizedek was a Jebusite. We do know from Genesis that he worshipped El Elyon, which is I maintain another name for Yahweh per Genesis 32. But I definitely think that Melchizedek was a Jebusite, and he was both a priest and a king. So he filled the double function here. But he wasn't Shem. I think Shem had died long before this point. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. White Girl posts Instagram black screen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's been a while. Okay. And she says, it seems odd to me that Yahweh made himself known as God of the mountain El Shaddai when there was an Ugaritic El already. Do you have any thoughts why? Okay. The fact is that the word El is both a name of a Ugaritic god, basically the father, the king of the gods. He's the highest god in the Ugaritic pantheon. But it was also a common name for God as well. It's both a proper noun and a common noun. It's a proper noun in that it refers to the Ugaritic god El. It's a common noun in that any god could be an El. Okay? So, when you have, say, El Shaddai or El Elyon, it's trying to be a little more specific here of which god it is. Okay? So, it's just one of those things it's both. You find this in Semitic roots everywhere. Okay, and El is just the Semitic word for God. You find that going in every Semitic culture practically. Even in Islam, which Arabic is a Semitic language. It is a Semitic language, and where we see Allah. Well, Allah is the Arabic al, El. It comes from that same El root. So, we do find that that this is just something that's is ubiquitous in Semitic languages. It's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So it's no surprise then that we have a culture with a say a large pantheon like we find at Ugarit, and it shouldn't then surprise us then that their highest god is also called El. Why not? He's the big god. So, Yahweh is a specific name of a god, but we also find though that we have these more descriptive terms for God as well, like El Shaddai. So, those are my thoughts on this. It's very, very common. As I said, very common in Semitic cultures. So, shouldn't surprise us, and it shouldn't surprise us either that there's borrowing too between certain gods of certain traits between Semitic cultures as well. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Wesley Coleman for $20. Thank you very much for this super chat. What are your thoughts on Hugh Ross's argument that Psalm 104 is a creation narrative and that verses 6 through 9 preclude a global flood reading because it ends with the phrase, the waters would not return to cover the waters will not return to cover the earth. Okay. Let's bring up Psalm 104. I did it again. I keep hitting that one. Okay. Psalm 104. Psalm 4. Okay, verses 6 through 9. And verse 6 through 9 reads, Thou didst cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters were standing above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the sound of thunder they hurried away. The mountains arose. The valleys sank to the place which thou didst establish them. Thou didst set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. Okay. Now, do I think that this is... do I think Hugh Ross's argument here has any merit? Jeez. It depends on which side of the bed I wake up on, honestly. We do know Psalm 104 is taken from an Amarna hymn, from the Hymn of the Aten. It's adapted. It's one of those Egyptian hymns that's been adapted for Yahweh worship. So, there's definitely some ideas in here of various, events within creation. Do I think this precludes a global flood? No, I don't think this precludes a global flood. Do I think this supports a global flood? No, not necessarily either. This could be, he could be right. This could be an act of creation, where we see the gods separating the waters, per Genesis 1. That's definitely a possibility here. But then again, too, if you have a global flood, then you would expect, the mountains to rise and the valleys to sink as well, and the floodwaters to rush away and not come back. So, either way, both sides are going to interpret this in their own way. The creationists are going to, the young Earth creationists are going to interpret this as a flood. The old Earth creationists are going to interpret this as being, say, the creation act of Genesis 1. I don't think there's enough evidence here to really make it clear which one it is. So, I'm just calling this one as it is. However, there is sort of one little thing that gives Hugh Ross's argument a bit of merit here, which is verse 2, which is the stretching out of the heavens. And that's definitely an act that happens, say, before the. If you are a young Earth creationist, you're going to say that verse 2 here is applying to day 4. If you are a old Earth creationist or some other form of creationist, you're probably going to say that happens before the first day. So it's really going to depend here. It's really going to depend on what sort of ideas you're bringing into this passage, how you interpret this. My personal thought on this is that it is a creation narrative, but it also does not exclude the flood either, a global flood either. So absolutely, it is a creation narrative. But it could be also the flood. I can go either way on this one. I don't think there's enough evidence one way or the other, honestly. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, and okay, JCon45 for £5 British. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. and Mrs. Falk. She appreciates the hello. I appreciate the work you do. I listen to your videos at work. Awesome. You give me much to think about and more books on my wish list. Yes, books are a vice. I have to admit, I'm addicted to the books myself. So I'm glad this is providing you with food for thought as you work. I know when I go to my job, I often will listen to YouTube videos or podcasts, and it does help me get through the day as well. So I'm really, really happy that I'm helping somebody get through their workday as others help me get through mine. So I'm very, very happy about this. I'm very, very pleased about this. And I'm so grateful you appreciate the work. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And it does help us to continue doing the work as well. So thank you so much. Angel VWM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. No questions, just hope all is well and God bless. Well, thank you very much. I am recovering, fortunately, from the Rona. It was, as I say, it was in some ways it was actually not as bad as the vaccinations itself. I had a lot of complications with the vaccinations. So actually having contracted the actual disease now, it was just like, well, the disease was not as bad as the vaccinations, not by a long shot. I know a lot of people just breeze through the vaccinations. I was not one of those people. So, it was just, this is not medical advice. This is not telling anyone not to get the vaccinations. I just had a hard time with them. And that's just me personally. So, I suffered a lot of complications with them. So, I don't quite believe when they tell me that nobody has suffered complications, because I was one of them. But I also think, too, that I'm also glad I took the vaccinations, because this might have been worse without them. Especially given my particular medical history. So yeah, recovering, convalescing, and very, very much appreciate the fact that you're supporting our channel. And God bless you also. Thank you so much. Okay, Cole Walker for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I have a random question. I believe you mentioned being a fan of D&D novels. Are you a fan of the Legend of Drizzt series?
The Dark Elf.
Oh, the Dark Elf series. Okay. I have not read the Drizzt series.
Oh, they're my favorite.
My wife just told me that they're her favorite. No, I haven't read them. I have read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, but, that's not one.
Nature versus nurture. Can a dark elf be good?
Can a dark elf be good, huh? Okay.
Really?
Well, my wife is apparently the one who is a big fan of this, apparently. So, you made her very happy. And if she's happy, well, then I'm happy. And even the D&D novels, I've read a couple of the novels. I haven't read many of them, honestly. I know there's a lot of them out there, especially the Forgotten Realms. I know there's a lot of D&D novels. I was actually more of a player of the role-playing game myself. So, but I have read a few of the D&D novels as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat and the random question. I love these popular culture questions. Okay, and we're almost at the end here. So, RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I see you made it here today. Wonderful. What type of YouTube podcasts and videos do you watch? Oh, what type of podcasts and videos do you watch at work? Good to see you feeling better. I got sick with my first jab, not the second one. Well, I got sick with them both. My first jab was actually, I had a lump on my arm that was the size of a baseball that lasted for 10 days. My second jab, I was actually sick for 3 days. Weakness, chills, sweats, fever. It was pretty bad. It was actually pretty bad. So yeah, I got really, really, really sick off the second jab. In both cases, I actually had lightheadedness on both the first and second jab. So I actually had to. I nearly passed out on the first jab. It dropped my blood pressure through the floor, and they had to pick me up and take me over to first aid on the first jab. So I was not a happy camper for those. Now, the type of podcasts I listen to, well, because I'm trying to pass the day, I do a lot of, say, guilty pleasure kind of podcasts. There's a podcast I listen to on Ukrainian lessons. I have been trying to pick up a little bit of Ukrainian. So I am learning a little bit of spoken Ukrainian through the podcasts, and that's because I got a lot of friends who are Ukrainian, so it's good to know a little bit of their language. So I listen to that at work. I also listen to a podcast on say finance. I do have an interest in finance, particularly cryptocurrency. I'm very, very interested in cryptocurrency. I'm interested in it as a technology as well as a investment. And I also listen to stuff on the paranormal. People do have a lot of experiences about the paranormal, so it's interesting to hear what they say about it. And I hear it from several angles. Basically Christians who talk about the paranormal, non-Christians who talk about the paranormal, even skeptics who talk about the paranormal. And there's a large variety of podcasts out there on this. So for me, I find this stuff very interesting. So it boils down to sort of those sort of categories where I'm doing language acquisition and learning about finance, and then doing, if I still got time in the day, learning a bit about people's paranormal experiences. So yeah, it's those are the sort of podcasts I listen to when I'm at work. Occasionally there will be like YouTube channels, like there'll be like debates on YouTube channel. Like for example, sometimes I'll listen to Jimmy Akin's channel. I find him, he's got some very interesting material. He's very Catholic, though. Very, very Catholic. I mean, he is an apologist for Catholic answers. So you do have to take that, in with some of what he says. But he'll talk about some of the stuff in some very candid ways, and it's actually very interesting. So that's what I listen to when I'm at work. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and then we got a Wesley Coleman for $20. Thank you very much for another super chat. Very generous tonight. Very much appreciated. Thank you for your answer on the Hugh Ross question. Do you mind if I include it in my references for an upcoming video? Sure. Just let me know what the video is. Sometimes YouTube will alert me of when there are people have copied parts of my video. And I don't want to give anyone a copyright strike that has prearranged it with me. So, yes, you are free to include it in your references for your upcoming video. You don't have any problem with that. Just let me know what the video is. Shoot me a message or something. and I think I've got you can contact me on Twitter, or if you contact me on Facebook, you do have to let me know who you are, so I don't think you're a spammer, because I get a lot of those on YouTube, or sorry, on Facebook. But yeah, just let me know which it is, so I don't erroneously copyright strike it. Because we've had both issues. We've had people who have taken pieces of our video, with permission, and that's cool. We're totally cool with this if it's with permission. We've also had people like rip it off wholesale as well, and that wasn't so cool. There was a church that decided to copy several of our videos, basically take off our banners and put their church banner on front of it, to try to get people to come to their church. And that wasn't cool. That wasn't cool, because we weren't endorsing their church per se. So,
nor did they give credit where credit was due.
Yeah, and nor did they give credit where credit was due. So, I'm totally fine with you including it in your references for your upcoming video. No problem. You can even take the appropriate clip if you like for use in your video. So, you've let me know, but do tell me the exact video on the channel so I again can recognize it should it come up on a content ID scanned by YouTube. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and have a great night. Okay. Courtney Thompson for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. If you lived in ancient Egypt and adhered to their cosmogony, which god Ennead would you follow and why? I think I answered this one earlier. Yeah.
So give him a brief summary.
Okay, the brief summary is I would probably either follow Seth, because he's really an interesting god, and I eat pork and I love pork and I can't go without my pork. And Seth worshippers were one of the few cults in Egypt that allowed its adherents to eat pork. The other reason is the other god I might have followed would have been Thoth, which is the god of scribes, writing, magic, and that's because I'm a real book nerd, essentially. So that's sort of the summary. Is Seth is really interesting, and he's he's part of the Ennead. Thoth, not part of the Ennead, but still an interesting god. Very interesting god, and god of the scribes. So those are my reasons for if I had been, an ancient Egyptian pagan, that's what I would probably have followed. One of those two. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he also asks another $5 super chat. Thank you again. Do you think the heavenly book of a cow usurped the divine epithet Yahweh, namely I am that I am? No, I don't. I've heard this argument, and when I've looked this up, it doesn't quite work out I am that I am. It basically comes out to the one who is. Okay? So you have to be very careful about how exactly you're translating this. I don't think the Book of the Cow usurped the divine epithet of Yahweh. But there is that sort of the one who is. Okay? It is not I am that I am. It's not that at all. So, it's been a while since I looked this one up, though, to be honest. So, it's been a long time. I think somebody asked me this once, I believe, something like 7 years ago. Long before I had a YouTube channel, people would actually, write me emails, ask me questions, and already as I was doing my PhD in Egyptology, it had already people were already going around, saying, hey, there's this guy out there who will answer your questions on ancient Egypt. So long before we had a YouTube channel, people would ask me stuff about this. But it's like 7 years ago, something like that, when I last looked at this. But it was not I Am That I Am. That much I remember for sure, because because something like that would be very, very odd, even syntactically in Egyptian. It'd be just it's not something you would find normally in Egyptian syntax. It would be exceptionally strange, So, and he comments a little further. I learned about this from John Currids' work on polemical theology against the gods. Now, okay, I'm going to be very blunt about Currid here. Currid is not an Egyptologist. Currid was not an Egyptologist. He was essentially a, how do I say this? Old Testament, Second Temple period, specialist in Israelite literature. Okay, that was his specialization. Okay, so he's not an Egyptologist. His grasp on the Egyptian language is not good. It wasn't good. And I think his views on Exodus being a polemic against the gods of Egypt, I think isn't good exegesis. It's not good exegesis. And it doesn't actually bear out. You start looking at the details of Currid's analysis here, and they start falling to bits. And they start falling to bits really rapidly. Like, for example, like he'll call the god Seth, we just mentioned recently, as an agricultural god of grain. Seth is not an agricultural god, not even close to an agricultural deity. So things start falling apart for Currid very quickly once you start looking at the fine details. And the devil in this stuff is always in the details. It's the little things that make these theories work. And I think Currid was satisfied with the generality. And I think he like, for example, when he I think he looked at, say, the 10th plague, the final plague of the Passover, where it talks about this plague being a judgment for all the gods of Egypt. And I think he extrapolated that to include the other 9 plagues. Well, the biblical text never says this. Biblical text never says this. John Currid also tends to use some dubious translations, which is why I surmise that his handle on ancient Egyptian language is not that good. Like his use of the Book of the Cow. The Heavenly Book of the Cow. I think he's using a rather dated translation, and I think if he had been better versed in the Egyptian language, and frankly, it's not easy to do. It takes a good 4 years to become really competent at ancient Egyptian, to be competent enough to use it in academic work. It takes a long time, and most Old Testament scholars never make it. They never achieve that competence because it's just such a huge time investment. So I think that Currid's work here is problematic. It's problematic, and yeah, I wouldn't have been opposed if, say, the cow, the Heavenly Book of the Cow, had usurped the divine epithet "I am that I am." Okay. I don't think that would have been a problem per se. And I don't think it would have been a problem because, epithets were shared. Various gods across the ancient Near East shared each other's epithets. So again, I don't think, just because if it had occurred, it would have been necessarily usurped. Could have been the other way around too. Divine epithets are like that. Okay? But I just don't think in this particular case that the cow epithet or the Heavenly Book of the Cow is using that epithet. It's using something else instead. All right? So, Currid was not an Egyptologist. Here's the problem. Here's the problem with Egyptology. He was at the University of Chicago. He was at the University of Chicago, definitely. But you look at his PhD, and it was not in Egyptology. Let me see. What was John Currids? Let me just do a quick lookup of his PhD. John Currid, PhD dissertation. Yeah, here's his. This is his. Here's John Currid's PhD was on the the title of his dissertation was Archaeological Investigations into the Grain Storage Practices of Iron Age Palestine. Okay? That makes him a serial Palestinian archaeology, an Iron Age one at that. Okay? That's his specialization. Okay? And that's what he specialized in. Okay? So he's not an Egyptologist. He was basically a Syro-Palestinian archaeologist. And we do see this. We have actually seen this before. And I don't know, I understand why they do this. But I have noticed that there are a lot of sort of Syro-Palestinian archaeologists that go around claiming to be Egyptologists. And they're separate specializations.
Like a foot surgeon claiming to be a...
Yeah, it's kind of like podiatrists claiming to be a brain surgeon. You know, they're separate specializations. But I have seen a number of Syro-Palestinian archaeologists do this, where they'll say, "Oh, I'm an Egyptologist too." Oh, really? Are you recognized by the International Association of Egyptologists? Because their entry requirements are very strict. You know, you have to have earned your PhD in Egyptology to be qualified as an Egyptologist. It's and there's a really good reason why. This is not just academic, what do you call it now? Hedge protection. You know, it's not just academic hedge protection here. It's the fact that the number of sources an Egyptologist has to be able to engage is exceptionally high. It's exceptionally high. And it does take a specialization in Egyptology to come to terms with all those sources. It's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do if you have never specialized in it. And unfortunately, Currid, as a Syro-Palestinian archaeologist, would have never done that work. So, Again, it's an unfortunate thing. I have seen this happen more than once, and it does seem to be something that Syro-Palestinian archaeologists do tend to do. But Currid was a Syro-Palestinian archaeologist. He specialized in Iron Age 1. So, that's his background. So anyway, I want to thank you for that super chat and for that interesting discussion about Currid. So, I am, however, feeling still a little lightheaded. I still haven't had anything to eat, and we've almost gone 3 hours. So, I am going to do a quick scan for if there's a quick question here, non-super chat, and then I'm going to call it a night. I'm only going to take one non-super chat if I take one at all, just because I'm still a bit under the weather, so I want to.
First biblical brainstorm wanted to know, other than kitchen, who's your favorite scholars?
Ooh, I have a lot of favorite scholars, though. That's the problem. That'd be too hard to guess. I'll actually take that one. And I'm going to change the question just slightly. Okay, so this will be the last question of the night. Other than kitchen, who is your favorite scholar? Okay. Now, I have discovered a few basically younger scholars recently that I've actually really, really enjoyed. And I think they're definitely. I'll name two. And these are not. I wouldn't say that these are the top scholars in their field. They're up and coming scholars. One is Lorenzo Nigro. I think he's an excellent excavator. He does do excellent work at Jericho. Great scholar. Doesn't like controversy. Don't blame him for that. The other one I want to put in a plug for is Brent Strawn.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
I want to put in a plug for Brent Strawn. He's a young scholar. He has done an excellent book called The Old Testament is Dying. An excellent book on this. It's a good book. It's a really good book, and I highly recommend it. I've also written anthologies alongside him. I've never met him personally. I'd like to meet him personally at some point. But I would highly recommend Brent Strawn. So those are two basically newer scholars that I think are definitely deserving of some attention. And particularly Brent Strawn, I think he's one of the futures of responsible Christian scholarship. So, with that said, I think we're going to call it a night here. I'm exhausted, and we have gone now for 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that should make the basically the people who are listening to this at work very, very happy. It was an excellent set of questions tonight. Just great set of questions tonight. My favorite's still the ostrich question. I mean that was just absolutely that just really tickled me. That was just a great question.
Is Strawn an Old Testament scholar?
Yes, he's an Old Testament scholar. Yes, Strawn is an Old Testament scholar. So anyway, I want to thank everybody who donated a super chat tonight. Thank you so much. You guys are really helping us make ends meet and helping support this channel in just ways you guys can't even imagine. I want to thank our Patreon supporters. We've noticed that we've had an influx of new Patreon supporters, and we're thankful for each and every one of you. We're so grateful that you're helping us out. I apologize. I have not been able to get to the thank you letters as I should have. Again, I have been just, I've been both snowed under by the work and also by illness. So I deeply apologize for not getting those thank yous out sooner. So, but anyway, I want to make sure our Patreon supporters get some attention too, because they are really helping us out also. They are providing the new equipment that when our stuff eventually does break, because frankly we don't buy expensive equipment, so we have to replace it on a more regular basis than I'd hope. Okay. And again, I want to remind everyone that on Monday, May 2nd at 8 p.m. Pacific time, we are doing a popcorn reaction video. So I hope you can all join us for that. And with all that said, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We do really appreciate you having here, and just making this just really an enjoyable experience. So have a great night, everyone, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.